You picture yourself on the deck of a longship, cold spray hits your face, your helmet has two curved horns rising from the sides, catching the gray morning light. That image feels ancient, it feels earned. It is also completely invented. For more than 1,000 years of Viking history, not a single warrior wore horns into battle, not one. Today the horned helmet shows up on football mascots, metal album covers, cereal boxes, and Halloween costumes more than almost any other image tied to a real historical people, and yet archaeologists have never recovered a single verified Viking-age helmet with horns on it, not from Norway, not from Denmark, not from a single one of the thousands of graves excavated across Scandinavia. So where did this image come from? And why does it still feel so true? Let's start with what actually survives. In 1943, workers digging on a farm at Jernmundbu, in Ringerike, Norway, uncovered a warrior's grave packed with weapons, armor, and iron fittings. Buried inside it was a helmet. It's the only known complete Viking-age helmet ever found. Archaeologists call it the Jernmundbu helmet, and it looks nothing like the movies. It's a rounded iron cap. It has a ridge running front to back for strength. Over the eyes sits a spectacle-shaped guard, two joined loops of iron protecting the nose and cheekbones like a built-in pair of glasses. There are no horns, there's no room for horns. The whole design is about deflecting a blade, not decorating a skull. Other fragments back this up. Helmet pieces from the earlier Vendel period in Sweden, dated to the 6th through 8th centuries, show a similar pattern: rounded caps, face guards, sometimes a crest shaped like a boar. Boars mattered to Norse warrior symbolism, tied to fertility and protection gods. Horns did not. Across every fragment recovered from Scandinavia, from grave goods to scattered rivets and iron plates, the pattern repeats: no horns, not one. Ask yourself why that would be. Iron was expensive. A single functional helmet already represented a serious investment for a farmer warrior who spent most of the year working land, not fighting. Every extra piece of metal had a cost, in fuel. In a blacksmith's time, nobody was spending that on two brittle, wind-catching horns bolted to a piece of survival equipment. Think about it for a second. In a shield wall, packed shoulder to shoulder with axes and spears swinging at head height. A horn is not a threat display, it's a handle. It's something for the man next to you, or the enemy in front of you, to grab and twist your head sideways with. A blacksmith building gear meant to keep a customer alive was not going to hand him a built-in weakness. There's also the practical matter of the ships themselves. Longships were narrow, low, and often packed tight with men, oars, and cargo for journeys that could last weeks. A helmet with two protruding horns would catch on rigging, on low doorways, on the man rowing beside you. It's the kind of detail that sounds dramatic in a painting and becomes a liability in a boat. So if the archaeology says no, where did the horns come from? They came from an opera house in Germany, more than 1,000 years after the Viking Age ended. In the 1870s, the composer Richard Wagner staged his four-opera cycle Der Ring der Nibelungen, drawing on Norse and Germanic myth for its gods and warriors. The costume designer, Carl Emil Doppler, needed a way to make his singers look ancient, savage, and larger than life under stage lighting, visible from the back row of a packed theater. He put horns and wings on their helmets. It wasn't archaeology, it was theater. Doppler was building a visual shorthand for primal northern warrior, and horns did the job instantly, the same way a top hat instantly reads as Victorian gentleman or a white coat reads as doctor. The audience didn't need footnotes. They just needed a silhouette that said ancient and dangerous in one glance, and horns delivered that faster than any historically accurate spectacle guard ever could. He wasn't entirely starting from nothing, either. Decades earlier, Swedish illustrator Gustav Malmström had already drawn winged and horned helmets for an 1820s edition of the epic poem Frithiof's Saga, part of a wider romantic movement across northern Europe that was busy reimagining the Viking past as something mythic and grand. Doppler's opera costumes didn't invent the fantasy so much as supercharge it, giving it a stage, a paying audience, and a decade of touring productions across Europe. To spread it further than a single illustrated book ever could. That silhouette escaped the opera house almost immediately. 19th-century illustrators, painters, and book publishers, already swept up in a Romantic era obsession with a mythologized Norse past, borrowed it for covers and canvases. By the time Scandinavian nationalist movements were reaching for symbols of a heroic ancestral identity, the horned helmet was already sitting there, ready-made and instantly recognizable. Nobody had to invent it twice, it just needed repeating, in painting after painting, book cover after book cover. until repetition did the work that evidence never had. The Viking historian Neil Price, whose work on Norse belief and society draws heavily on burial archaeology, has pointed out how thoroughly this 19th-century invention fused with the real historical record in the public imagination, two separate things, a documented Iron Age warrior culture and a romantic stage costume, merged into a single mental image, and once an image is vivid enough, evidence has a hard time competing with it. The 20th century didn't correct the mistake, it mass-produced it. Newspaper comic strips like Hagar the Horrible put horned helmets in front of readers every single day for decades. Football teams, breweries, and toy companies picked up the same silhouette because it was already familiar and instantly readable. Nobody along the chain was checking a museum catalog. They were reaching for the version everyone already recognized, the same version Doppler had built for an opera stage. 100 years earlier, each new use didn't test the claim, it just reinforced it. The way a rumor gets more convincing every time it's repeated, regardless of whether anyone ever checks where it started. So let's reconstruct what a real Viking warrior actually put on before a raid. Most fighters wore no metal helmet at all, a basic leather or hardened hide cap was common, offering some protection against a glancing blow, cheap enough for a farmer who was also a part-time raider, a wealthier warrior, someone with status, land, or a good season of trading behind him, might own an iron helmet like the Germunbufind, a rounded dome, a spectacle guard over the eyes, maybe mail hanging from the rim to protect the neck. Underneath, a padded cap absorbed some of the shock of a blow. Over the body, a simple wool tunic, wind-resistant and layered for a climate that could turn brutal in hours. A shield, round and wooden, rimmed in iron or hide, was the most essential piece of kit any of them owned. Historians generally agree the shield mattered more to survival than the helmet ever did. An axe was cheaper to make and maintain than a sword, so most fighters carried one. Swords existed, but they were closer to a status symbol, expensive, sometimes imported, sometimes passed down for generations and given names. Picture the scene now, honestly this time, cold air, wet wool, the creak of a wooden hull working against the swell, a dozen men in leather caps and hand-me-down mail, gripping worn shield rims, breath fogging in front of them in the half-dark before dawn. Somewhere below deck, dried fish and hard bread, rationed carefully for a journey with no fixed end date. On the shore behind them, families who won't know if this trip succeeds for months. No horns catching the light anywhere in that picture. Just iron, wood, wool, and calculation. It's a quieter image than the one in your head. It's also the one that actually kept people alive long enough to make it home and tell the story. Here's the counterintuitive part. The horned helmet wasn't invented to make Vikings look impressive, it was invented to make them look primitive, animalistic, closer to beasts than men, for the benefit of a 19th-century opera audience who wanted their myths larger than life and their villains instantly recognizable. The myth was never really about the historical Vikings at all. It was about what a Romantic-era stage designer needed a northern warrior to look like under gaslight. From 30 rows back, and somewhere in the following century and a half, as the costume got reprinted, repainted, and eventually filmed, the fiction quietly got mistaken for the memory. This is not just a Viking problem, it's a pattern in how your own brain handles history in general. A vivid, simple image almost always beats a complicated, accurate one, because your mind is built to remember shapes and stories, not qualifiers and footnotes. You don't remember rounded iron cap, spectacle guard, occasional boar crest, regionally variable, mostly leather for the average fighter. You remember horns. One clean silhouette does the job that an accurate paragraph never manages to do in time. This is exactly why misinformation about far more consequential things spreads the same way today, not because people are careless, but because a striking, simple picture is easier to carry around in your head than an accurate, complicated one. And your brain will reach for the simple version first every single time unless something makes you stop and check. So the next time you see a Viking with horns on a beer label or a sports logo, you're not looking at a mistake exactly, you're looking at the memory of an opera costume from 1876, still doing its job 150 years later, still convincing people it was always there. The real Vikings never needed the horns, their world was harsh enough without theatrical flourishes, freezing seas, brutal winters, exhausting manual labor, and constant physical risk, all carried out in gear built for function over fear, by people who couldn't afford to waste iron on a silhouette. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with. You've probably carried this image for most of your life without ever questioning it, not because you're careless, but because nobody handed you a reason to look closer. That's true of a lot of what you think you know. The question isn't whether the picture in your head is vivid, it's whether anyone ever checked if it was true. Picture yourself on the deck of that longship one more time. Cold spray hits your face, but this time, look again. There are no horns catching the light, just a rounded iron cap, a plain wool tunic, and a man who has to survive the day using exactly what's in front of him, nothing more.